Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of The Resilience Factor. I am so excited to go on this journey with you of sharing really, really hard stories, really difficult things that people have been through. And the goal in sharing that is to give people hope. For some of you that are listening, you might be in a very dark place where you feel like you don't know how you're going to come out on the other end of this okay, and maybe you're giving up hope. And the goal with the resilience factor is to show you that you can do hard things and that there is hope at the end of the tunnel. And so all the guests that I bring on are going to be sharing incredible stories. And honestly, some of them are going to be really difficult to listen to. So I will warn you ahead of time because we're going to have real and raw conversations here, because I truly believe that when we can connect on a vulnerable, real level is when lives can be changed. And so I am completely honored today to be introducing you to my very first guest on the Resilience Factor. His name is Travis Ayla. And a fatal accident shattered Travis's life and his reputation, which drove him to rock bottom. This was a very dark and pivotal time for Travis that helped him build resilience and ultimately success. Today, Travis helps others overcome their struggles and find the courage to pursue their dreams. Travis is a single father. He's a warrior. He's a coach. He's a speaker. And his story has been shared in Forbes, Fortune, and on the Steve Weatherford Show. I'm honored, Travis, to have you here with me today to share your story of hope, resilience, and redemption. Welcome.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate you. I'm honored to be on here.
So this is going to be a really, I think, hard conversation for some people to hear. And so I'm really grateful for you being willing to come on and share. I'd like to start kind of earlier in your life, right? Like, tell me about your childhood and kind of, because you became a police officer. So like, take us from your childhood into like how you became a police officer.
Sure. So my biological father, went to prison when I was 2. So from that point forward, my mom was always seeking the next father figure for me and my sister, and that was a almost never-ending search for most of my childhood until I was about 13. So throughout that period, my mom dated around a lot, tried different men as far as fitting that role. And I was raised in a Mormon household with my grandparents. That exposure to religion, the way that structure was, having no father figure and having my grandfather, which was very much by the book through Mormon faith, but not walking it out at all, kind of sent me down a path of always looking for leadership, guidance, and something that I could actually respect. Couple that with most of the men in my life that my mom brought around were abusive alcoholics, and took a lot out on me and my sister, and were definitely not the personification of excellence by any means. My mom did the best she could, and I don't say any of this to dishonor by any means. She did the best that she could in pursuing leadership and a father figure for me and my sister. But that created a very big void in my life that, whether through sports, whether through you name it. I mean, we moved around every 2 to 3 years, and that led to nothing but seeking validation, nothing but trying to be enough, right? Nothing but having to walk around with this S on my chest that I was creating because there was aggression at home, there was anger at home, there was everything kind of being my fault. I was a pincushion for a lot of things, or a punching bags, one of the two. My mom wasn't always in the happiest moods because of the way she was being treated. And I kind of got it from both angles growing up. Very disciplinary household, and a lot of things that I didn't do right, and not much praise for what I did do. Right. So growing up in a household like that while also moving every 2 to 3 years, always being the new kid, definitely plenty of fights, plenty of moments of having to try and reinvent myself, make myself cool, make myself relevant, make myself appealing and appeasing and important to people that I didn't know that
Mhm.
I probably shouldn't care about. But at that age, obviously, we just want to be liked. We want to be popular,
Yeah.
especially when you're not liked at home. But over time, that really created this sense of anything I want to do in my life, I got to do it myself. I can't rely on anybody. I can't trust anybody. No matter what I do, it's probably not going to be enough. So I need to be the best at it, be the 1%. And then maybe, just maybe, it might be enough to get some eyes and some attention. Didn't grow up in a household of I was proud of you being said much. And when I say abusive alcoholics, there there was a time in that period growing up where the man that stuck around the longest, his name was Ken. He was so abusive and expressing his anger to me, my mom, and my sister that I actually asked for a bunk bed when I was about 12, just so that I could be on that top bunk in case he were to come in the bedroom. I at least had a little bit of time
Mm.
to retreat, hide, react in some way, form, or fashion. And I remember that bunk bed being under the rafters of the house we lived in, to where I kind of decorated those rafters with like shoes. But one of those shoes actually had a gun hidden in it. It was a gun I
Mm.
stole out of his closet. Um, but that was the childhood for the most part. And again, love my mom. She did the best that she could. Uh, but it definitely created a void for leadership, for what does being a man look like.
Mhm.
Definitely turned me away from all things religion, to say
Mhm.
the least.
Yeah.
And I found myself excelling in sports, team sports. That kind of brotherhood was the only thing that I found that I got a little bit of validation for, and uh, got some praise, got some support from coaches and teachers and what have you, because it didn't matter what I did in school, as long as I was on the field or on the basketball court, I was important.
Yeah.
So led to a lot of that, which creates voids as we grow up for sure.
Yeah. Do you think that you know, kids who have a really abusive, awful, negative environment that they grow up in like you did, can go one of two ways, right? They're either going to say this isn't going to keep me down and they're searching for leadership and positivity and praise and looking for that, and then there's others who kind of succumb to it, right, and become really really depressed and
Yeah.
might go down a path of crime or other things. Like they're both children are trying to get attention in some way, whether it's through going down a path of crime and they're getting attention in a negative way. Do you think that, and I mean, the fact that you got involved in sports, do you think that that was a big reason why you didn't go the other direction, or was there something else in you or in your life that had you were still seeking that validation, like you said, still seeking that love and praise and attention, but you sought it in a more positive way through sports versus crime or gangs or something like that?
Yeah, I think just like most things in life, when you get hit with adversity and challenge, you can either be a victim, right, or a victor.
Mhm.
And I definitely think growing up, depending on your environment, there's a lot of factors and tangibles, right? But people either become a victim from it and ask, well, why does this happen to me? Why me? Why me?
Mhm.
Um, or they can identify with, uh, I'm going to make sure this never is something like my kids have to deal with, right? Or I'm going to get as far away from this as
Yeah.
possible, right?
Yeah.
Kind of that fight or flight response in a lot of ways. You can either take this on as a challenge of why I'm going to get away from this, or I'm going to just stay stuck in the quicksand effect of why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be, and just really stay stuck in that. For me, having a sibling watching how my mom was treated by these men, I think was a very big factor as to why I wanted to pursue being different, being better than. And I really locked myself into video games and movies and a lot of fictional, superheroes and things of that nature. So there was that kind of grandiose idea that went in there. And I would definitely say that sports helped mold that even further, because what sports originally came from for me was a reason not to come home, right? It was a lot of practices. Like,
Yeah.
I got involved in chess clubs. I got involved in anything extracurricular to stay at school and not have to
Yeah.
come home.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when I came home, it would turn into a handful of stuff. Like, I remember coming home to my stepdad saying, "Hey, I'm going to go meet a friend out for dinner," and that turned into going over a mile away to a bar for him to meet up with some girl while he cheated on my mom, and then got drunk to the point that I had to drive back, right? Like 12, 13 years old at the time. So
Wow.
having it walked out so bad, I think as a man, really gave me drive and motivation to want to be better than that. And finding so many ways to expose myself every couple of years when we moved around in any extracurricular sense, to not come home just really gave me a lot of different viewpoints of what life has to offer, even if at the time I didn't feel like I was worthy of it or that I could be good enough at it. It still showed me that there were other things. Right.
Well, I think the important thing to point out here is that you made a choice, right? And maybe obviously at that age you didn't realize to the level of what you were doing, but you had a choice in a very difficult environment. Like you said, you could choose to become a victim, or you could choose to become a victor. And again, at that age, you probably wouldn't have used that language, but you made a choice in your life that I'm not going to continue this cycle of what's happening in my life. I want something better. I want something different. And whether that was just by pure the way that we're built and we all crave love and attention and affection and acceptance, but you made that choice to seek something that you thought would fulfill that need and that void that you had in your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to point out, because we all have choices, right? You couldn't control your circumstances, but you could make a choice for yourself.
Right.
And so you got into sports, right? You excelled at sports. Take me through then, as you're transitioning into your adult life, what does that look like?
Yeah. So whether it was sports, I even started, my first job was at 12. All these things started showing me that I was capable of being important, right, on sports teams, as well as not ever really getting what I wanted from a financial standpoint, like if I wanted new shoes or this or that. Not that we ever really wanted for anything, but I definitely didn't get what I would ask for, right? So working that young showed me that I can go get whatever it is that I want. If I want something, I can create it. One way or another, I can find a way. So coupled that with things like sports and different academics to see that, I could be highlighted and showcased in a way that was important. And I won't say people were proud of, but that people would want to be around me or want me around certain things. I mean, that started to really create a sense of making life about me. Like, what can I do? What am I good at? It really molded me into a person of any room I went in, I had to figure out how to be the best at it. Like I said, I was chess club, football, basketball, track, sign language. I competed in state and sign language. Like, it didn't matter the task. I just walked into a room, was like, I have to be the best, otherwise I don't matter. Right. So it became a first or nothing. Initially out of a fear, I feel, of not being able to fill the void of being important enough or mattering enough. And then that, as I grew older, turned into nothing but ego, right? And overconfidence and cockiness of, I can walk into a room and I'm gonna be the best at whatever we're doing. Doesn't matter. Give me
Well,
the
and plus then
challenge.
you have
I'm gonna
to,
do it.
yeah, then you have to also maintain that, right?
Correct.
Once you've achieved that, now you have to maintain it because you can't be anything less or
Right.
it's
Yeah. So it really fostered this sense of caring way too much about what people thought, right?
Mhm.
Getting the feedback, like, are you impressed? No, not yet. Just watch. Let me go do
Mhm.
this. Let me go do this. And just almost being this like circus act of, let me show you all the things I can do. And if you can do something, let me show you how I can do it better, right?
Yeah.
Because if I can't, if I'm not at the pinnacle, you don't care about me, right?
Mm.
Now, over that time, my mom did, she did get the favor that she, I believe, deserved in her life, and that his name was Chuck, and that man came into my life around 13, 14 years old. Actually, he was 14, um, and he gave me a model of excellence that I could pay attention to.
Mm.
Um, Definitely kind of late, but better late than never.
Right.
And that did soften me up a little bit on the ego side of things, because here was a man that was doing very well in his life, and had a lot of accolades and a lot of things. He was the guy in his field. He was in the prison systems. He started at Leavenworth and worked his way up, and he was a warden at several different locations and ultimately worked for the Department of State, and uh, had no shred of ego about him. Like, you wouldn't know the weight he carried in his position unless you followed him to work and heard about him. Like, he
Mm.
never spoke about the things that he did. All he spoke about was his family, about my mom, and just had a lot of humility to just do things for people and to just live a happy, joyous life.
Yeah.
So that softened it a little bit, but it definitely
Mhm.
didn't show me that there's at least one man out there that
Right.
is doing it just to do it. But I pretty much had a hard, rigid skeleton of ego at this point.
Mm.
And like you said, trying to keep up with it, right? Trying to keep up
Right.
with being the best, or what's the next accolade? What's the next? It's like this high of,
Right.
got an award that lasts until everybody's over the award. Now, what's the next one I can go get, right?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that as a child, when you started getting into sports and trying to be the best and do the best thing, it was a coping mechanism for you that actually helped you and was a positive thing in your life in your childhood to help you deal with a very, very horrific negative environment. And that coping mechanism was a positive thing that served you well during that time until you then get older and it starts to manifest and show up in your life in a different way. Like you said, now it became this never ending quench, like thirst that you just couldn't quench. And
Yeah.
you had to keep getting more and you had to keep getting more. And the ego grew. And so now this thing that actually was a very good thing early on in your life that helped you through a very difficult time is now showing up in your life in a way that is not as positive. You know what I'm saying? It's
Mhm.
still serving its purpose, but to me it sounds like it's starting to now create its own little monster, in a new way. Would you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Like everything in moderation, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
a lot of things that are good for you until it becomes too much.
Yeah. Yeah. So you eventually became a police officer. Tell me about how that came to be, and let's talk about that some.
Sure. Um, so excelled through school. I actually had a full ride scholarship that I had passed towards graduation, because I just, in hindsight, found some wisdom somewhere and humility that, and I don't know how much of it was humility or just, again, seeking more.
Mm.
But I decided to go join the Marine Corps, or at least join the military at the time, because if I
Hmm.
didn't go get some discipline in my life, I was just going to party it away.
Yeah.
And then when looking at the military, the ego side of me is like, well, if I'm going to do it, I got to do the best, and that's the Marine Corps, right? So, um, pursued that, got out of the Marine Corps in about 2006, medical discharge, and that just created an even bigger chip on my shoulder of like, well, I didn't get to do that to the fullest, right? I didn't get to do all the things in that category. So shortly thereafter, got recruited onto police department out in Annapolis, Maryland, and I just hit the ground running there. It was service. There was a commendable part of it that drew me from the service aspect.
Yeah.
But if I'm being honest, the biggest part was, well, if I become a cop, then I can go be SWAT. I can do all these things that you see in the movies. And like I told you before, in my childhood, like movies were my escape. Even to this day, that's the one thing that if I just need to get away from the world, I go to the movies and I can shut everything else out. No matter the business, no matter what's going on in my life, I can stay present to a movie because that was just kind of my coping mechanism growing up on how to escape, right? And becoming a cop really turned me to having an excuse, I would say, to be have a little bit of ego and a little bit of cockiness, right?
Yeah.
Because putting a badge on and being that protector to the community, like, gives you this sense of it's okay to be rough and have a little bit of ego and cockiness because you have to step in to protect somebody.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was driven also from always feeling like I was having to look after my mom and my sister growing up with, the abuse and things of that nature. I'd called police many times growing up and been in enough of those situations that I feel like that all connected.
Yeah, you get to be a hero.
Yeah. But the service wasn't enough, that's for sure. Once I became a cop, I was like, okay, so how do I become SWAT? How do I become this cool figure that you see in all the movies and do all these things? And got to that pretty quick, actually a record pace for that department. About 2 years in, got on the SWAT team. 6 months or so in, I got on honor guard team. So by 2 years in, I was on 2 specialty units, and both of which were obviously very highlighted for a lot of reasons. Honor guard, doing funerals and ceremonies and parades and all these things, and having to be dressed up in the ultimate representation of an officer and all these high-profile events. And then SWAT, obviously, just being the 1%, toughest as nails in the room, best shot, all these things. Pursued all of that and just kept pursuing it to the point that from SWAT turned into being recruited to another department and becoming a team leader on that SWAT team, which then turned into what's the next box I need to check. That's undercover, narcotics detective, and largest drug busts, and get in the news for that, the news for this, office of the year, detective of the year. Like, it just became this never-ending pursuit of accolades and awards, and like, how big is my resume, and what are all the things that Travis Ayla's done. And I want to walk into a room, no matter what department, and say, oh, that's Travis. Like, he's the guy when it comes to tactics. Like, it pivoted from service, I would say, to just being the best, right? Like, protecting people and protecting my team was one thing, but then as a firearms instructor, as a SWAT team leader, it was like, I have to be the best. 1, because people are counting on me. 2, because that's the title. And the moment I'm not the best, I get replaced, right? And it was a higher than life feeling for quite some time.
How old were you at that time?
So 2009, early 20s, I got into law enforcement until about, say, early 30s. Okay. So it was about 9 years
You're pretty
total.
young to, like you said, be getting detective of the year and officer of the year and all the things, and moving through the ranks at a very young age, for sure. During
bought my
that
first house at 21. All throughout these things, I felt like I was accomplishing plenty.
Yeah. During this time, I'm curious, like you said, you're kind of having to feed the beast at this time, right? It's just like keeping it going, feeling important, feeling a position of kind of like the hero, and the best. I'm curious because a lot of people that I know, especially whether they're in the business world or they're in corporate or whatever, there's a lot of people out there that are driven for success because they're trying to fill some pain or some hurt or some void or something in their life. And so I'm curious, at the time you're achieving all of these things, were you happy? Like, were you like, this is good, this is great, and you were really happy? Or was it on the exterior, everybody's like, oh my goodness, look at Travis, he's amazing, and you were still suffering inside? I'm curious of like what Travis was like on the inside during that time when you were achieving all of these incredible things.
Sure. Yeah, no, it was definitely on the outside as far as happiness. On the inside, I was torn between two things, right? One, I think there was this void in not knowing my biological father and feeling like he's been out of my life this whole time. And at some point in time, he's going to come want to be in my life. And I'm going to show him like all that I became without him. That was one side of the coin. The other side of the coin was where Chuck had come into my life in my mid-teens. I felt like I had this responsibility that I wanted to carry on a legacy for him. Like he had his son, who wasn't at the time walking out a good representation of his name. My stepbrother at the time was in and out of jail and stole from him and was battling addiction and a lot of other things. And when I say this was the first and only man that really walked out, true excellence and humility, when I turned 18, I actually changed my last name, went to the courthouse myself, changed my last name to Ayla. It had been Sherman prior to that. Wow. And that was like my present to him on Christmas Day. And when I took on his name, that became that other side of the coin that I felt like I always had to pursue making this name worthy of being handed to me, right? Because that was the first man in my life that gave me that feeling of somebody to aspire to that was not in a movie, right? That was not in a comic book. So the happiness was subverted by, one, always being prepared to be able to tell my biological, like, here's what you missed, and prove him, wrong for not being in my life. Yeah. And on the other side, proving Chuck right for having me in his life and taking me in as one of his own, even though he didn't have to. So I would say those were the two biggest needs and reasons, along with a little bit of imposter syndrome and things of that nature growing up.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me emotionally and mentally exhausting for you to have to maintain that level of excellence for the sake of what one person that didn't even know you might think of you, and another that you were trying to emulate and prove maybe that you were just good enough or as good as or could be, make him proud. What is the cost of all of that? Like, that feels exhausting.
Yeah, that is one word to use. I would say the cost is a lot of effort, a lot of achievement, and really it's akin to like empty calories, right? Like eating something that you maybe enjoy in the moment, but it's the wrong thing. It's like just empty calories. Pursuing all that excellence, all those accolades, all those things for justification of other people's perceptions did nothing for me, right? Did nothing to fill the void, did nothing to teach me what purpose was, what I was really seeking, right? Like, what was I seeking? A life of service? Was I seeking impacting people's lives by saving them? Like, I was involved in shootings and things of that nature that, lives were saved because of my involvement. But was I seeking that? Was I seeking like actually making an impact in people's lives, or was I just seeking the story, the accolade to be able to say I did it,
To say that
to
you
make
did.
me seem relevant and important and like I've achieved something or done something. Right? And
Yeah.
truth be told, I think for the most of my life, it was the latter, right? It was, I want to be able to do this so I can say I did it, not because I want to experience it, not because I want to see the impact, hear the impact, and really be present in the moment, but just to be able to put it on the list of things done.
Yeah.
And, at the end of the day, one of these will be worth it to one of these sides of the coins and feel that validation from the other side. And that is exhausting, and it's a wasteless effort, to be honest, because it had its impact, right? But I wouldn't be able to tell you it because I can't even remember a lot of it because I wasn't present. I was so focused on what's this going to get me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot. I recently sold my dream house that I didn't even know to dream that big. And I got to custom build this dream house. And I found myself whenever I would tell people where I lived, I would tell them all the people who lived in my neighborhood because I lived in a neighborhood where I had professional athletes that lived there, actors, movie producers. And I remember after the first couple of times when I told people where I didn't just say, oh, I live in Brentwood, Tennessee. Like I would say, oh, and this is the neighborhood I live in, and here's who lives there. And I remember after a few times of doing that, asking myself, like, why am I attaching that? Like, I've never done that in my life, been like, here's who lives in my neighborhood. And it was because I had this need for people to see me as successful. And it was like, oh, if you live in a neighborhood where there's other quote unquote successful people there that have achieved great things in their life, then that meant that I had achieved great things in my life too. And that was a very interesting journey for me to go on, where I started to attach my identity to where I lived and my home. And I think that many of us and many of the people listening will find that your story really resonates with them in some way, shape in their life, especially if they're in business, because a lot of times we do things because we want people to think that we're successful or we're worthy or any of those things. So that's really, that's really.
And we'll go to great lengths, like you're saying. Like it got to a point where whether it was a car I bought or shoes or whatever it was, I wanted to show it off. And if you didn't think it was cool or important, let me tell you why it is and I will sell you on it until you do, until you're able to validate that this is cool to you. That's why I got it.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah. Oh man, what a mess we make. So I want to go to the point in your life where the accident happened. There was a horrific accident that happened in your life that really, from what I know of your story, was a pivotal changing point in your life. And so take us to that time. I think, were you 26? Were you in your 20s?
Oh, let's see, 2015. So that would have been, it was right around that 26, 27.
Right around that. Okay. So you're mid-20s, you're a police officer who's achieved amazing things, you're off duty. Take us to the day that you got into the accident.
Sure. Apologies, late 20s, actually. I believe I was 29. This was a time in my life that honestly I probably couldn't have been any higher in my career. Money was good. I had some options on kind of part-time stuff I was doing. Thought I had everything figured out, buttoned up. I just won Detective of the Year. Was doing everything right, seemingly. Had all the boxes checked. And the day you're speaking of, I was actually on my way home from the gym. And it's definitely a vivid memory. I couldn't forget it if I wanted to, and I don't want to. But I was on my way home when there was a collision in front of me about, say, half a mile up. It started a little bit of a pile up, and obviously, as an officer, I'm trained in a lot of different things. One of those things being emergency vehicle operations. And when cars start piling up, there's only so many maneuvers you can make, and a lot of it's looking for the path of least resistance and where you can go and pull safe and decrease speed and all these things. In this moment, these cars piled up, and I had a decision to go right into more traffic or left into an opening, and I went left into an opening. When I went left into an opening, another car decided to do the same. And when that car came in front of me, I ended up striking that vehicle from the rear. Now, I was in an SUV. It was a silver Nissan Xterra. And when I impacted the rear of that vehicle, it sent my car airborne, rolling over top of that car several times. That flashback, when your car is rolling over and over and over, all kinds of things go through your head, right? Did I make the most of my time? What comes after this? What just happened? What's going to happen? Friends, family, career, all of it. Like the whole life flashing before your eyes is a serious thing. And ultimately, that car came to a rest on the driver's side. And I remember looking straight up at the passenger side door, and the car's billowing of smoke. And not knowing, is this airbag dust? Is the car on fire? Like, what is coming from? You get into a little bit of I won't say panic mode, but in high alert, being in the situations I've been in, the training I've had, I know this isn't good, so need to get out, right? So you start assessing the situation. The only way out of the car at that moment, the fastest way out, was to go north of my current position and out through what was the passenger side door. And I'll tell you, lifting a car or vehicle door, SUV, up against gravity while trying to kind of do a pull-up, muscle-up out of it's not easy. A lot of weight to hold up while you pull yourself out. Standing on the driver's side door, seats on my right here, and just door open, pull myself up and out. I know that's not an easy feat, but in the moment when adrenaline and smoke billowing and after a crash like that, adrenaline can do some crazy things. And I got out effortlessly, got out, jumped down, and the first thing I do is go into first responder mode, right? Like I would have any accident, whether I was in it or not. I look at myself, no broken bones, barely any scratches. I'm good. I'm safe. I'm solid. And the first thing I go to is the car that I struck, right? I got to go make the scene safe. And in my head, I'm thinking, I rear-ended a car. My SUV just kind of flipped over, even though I just came out, and if I know that it flipped, your head goes in this mode of like, was it as bad as it seems, or maybe not? And when I jumped down, I was like, okay, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. This SUV just looks like it kind of went up and then down inside. And when I jumped down, all I can see is the undercarriage of the SUV. So with this assumption in my mind, I come around the front of the car and I see the true carnage of the wreckage. And it was a compact car. There was 3 passengers in it, 2 teenagers in the front, and a elder veteran in the passenger rear seat. As I approached the car, I'm in that fight or flight response. I'm training is deep instilled, and I'm first going for signs of life and what do I need to do, how to make the scene safe while, fire, rescue, everybody's on their way. And I approached the first point of the vehicle, which is that left rear, and there is no left rear. The C-pillar, like right where the rear seat is, that point between the door and the gas cap, that point is up against the back seat, and there's no cavity there. There's just the remains of who used to be sitting there. And then I immediately, knowing that that person is deceased, attempt to go towards the driver's seat, but the top of the cab of the SUV is pinned just prior to that. So I have to go around. I go around to that other side of the car and I look into the vehicle and I see both teenagers. They're 17 years of age at the time. And they're both kind of draped over the center console. Neither were wearing their seatbelts. And at that point in time, like everything just froze. My instincts, my tactics, my training, all of it, just everything froze. And I realized here I am as a first responder. It's my job to make this safe and save their lives. And knowing the condition they're in, knowing that the worst thing I can do right now is to touch them with neck injuries and what have you. All I can do is wait. All I can do is keep this place safe and perimetered until experts get here to help them. And that is by far the most hopeless moment I've been in my life and definitely in my career at the time. And I remember looking around and there's this barricade on the side of the road that's dividing the two highways. And there's 30 plus people sitting there with the phones, pictures, recording, whatnot. And I've been on stages. I've been in a lot of situations where I felt like I was in a fishbowl, but never more prominent than that moment, realizing that, everybody's watching. I'm the only person that seemingly has an opportunity to help. And I know I can't do anything. Knowing the potential future of the outcome and being in that center focus for that reason and with no ability to do anything was a very low, hard point that seemed like I was there for an hour.
Yeah.
And truth be told, it was 5 minutes before medics and fire arrived. As they arrive, I step back and I'm still just soaking all this in, like, hoping everything's okay and watching fire and rescue go to work, cutting the door open, helicopters flown in to life flight these kids out. And I remember a paramedic turning to the vehicle that I was in and causing a big ruckus and getting some people over. Like, we got to get the driver out of this car. And it was wedged against the other car, and they were kind of like meshed together. And the only way in would have been through one of the back doors or through the top. And as they proceed to try to figure out how to get in, I just like, hey, you guys are good. It's my car. I was in it. They're like, no, we need the driver of this car. I was like, yeah, that's me. And but there's zero chance. You're talking. You were the officer on scene,
right?
Like, but who was driving? Once they realized it, I was telling them that I was the first on scene because I was the one in the accident. They just looked at me in awe, and I remember that moment being very surreal and still. Of there's no way you should be alive right now. Like, this accident, how could you survive it, much less just have some scratches on you? Yeah. And I remember one of the medics just looking at me like, man, you got a guardian angel. Like, for you to survive that. And he just kind of walked off in awe. And, they checked my vitals and I walk away from the scene. But I remember just being there at that scene in that situation and being hopeless, watching my life flash before my eyes, wondering my purpose, wondering what's going on, what's going to be the outcome of this accident. It's all just one big question mark.
Yeah.
And not having any answers.
So the two teenagers that were in the front seat, they were life flight it out, right? Did they
Yeah.
survive?
They did not.
They did not.
They passed in about 24 hours.
Okay. And so, you know, I was a paramedic in the Air Force for many years, and so I understand the being on the scene and your adrenaline is pumping and you're just trying to follow the training and do what you have to do. But eventually you go home and the adrenaline is gone
Yep.
and the reality of what happened sets in. And I'm wondering what you were feeling, what you were thinking after everything settled down. You're home. It's 24 hours later. All three of the people that were in that vehicle are deceased. And so tell us what's going through your mind at that time and where you were at.
Fear for sure.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen? Failure. Feeling like at the end of the day, everything I aspired to not be from my childhood has had the same outcome as far as hurting people. And this reputation and image and persona that I thought mattered, that I felt, proud, that was so opposite of the men that I grew up around, was just an image, right? Like, what have I actually done?
Right.
What can I lean on? Like, now that image is in the news for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on every headline. I'm watching every news channel, every social media post. Like, I put myself into it. I was just reading and watching and reading and watching. You either go into this, I feel like, depressive, dark, get away into a corner mode, or you just face it head on.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose to face it head on. And I ignored phone calls from people and just watched the news and just read the comments, and I just started believing, like, yeah, no, this is me. Like, wow, I'm going to jail. Yeah, my life is over. I'm a murderer. All these things. And I'm no different than everything I sought to differentiate myself from. I did all these things, all these awards and athletes, and for what? Like, I'm a murderer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
At least that's in the moment how I'm feeling, for sure. And that went on for quite some time. I had news fans pouring up to the house wanting to interview me and my fiance at the time, and anybody that knew me. And the further that went into questions and conversations about who's Detective Ayla, the more the facade and the image crumbled at my feet of importance, because, the people that I worked so hard to impress and earn the respect of were some of the ones first to throw my name in the dirt. And, whether it was jealousy, whether it was whatever, I mean, a lot of it could have been well in merit, because I was very cocky and ego driven. I was very much about who I was. All that just came crumbling down, all the way to the point that the FOP, which is the Fraternal Order Police, it was the basically the union for officers.
Mm-hmm.
I was a shop steward on for years, and I helped them negotiate contracts. Like, I was, again, the guy, right? I was important in politically putting things together with officers and them. And they very quickly let me know, like, hey, you're going to be on your own on this. This is too high profile, and we can't get involved in this. And I was like, it was a traffic accident. Like, you guys are acting like I walked up to somebody and put on my gunpoint.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely put me in a space of feeling alone. And I made it worse because I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just let that feeling get deeper and deeper of failure, and having this image that was now gone. There's no recovering from this. Like, I need to change my name. Like, all those things are through your head.
Right.
Of how do I be a different person?
I'm going to have to go somewhere where nobody knows me.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long I know that it was a very dark place for you, and I'm curious how long how low did you go and how long did you stay there?
Um, First, it was just ignoring phone calls and texts and people stopping by wanting to reach out, the few that were doing so. And then it went to um, just completely destroying myself mentally and uh, having complete and zero self-worth. Ultimately, I'd say it this went on for about a year. Uh, they wrestled with whether or not they were going to indict me or press charges, or there's an investigation and there's another investigation and there's another investigation. Was this an accident? Was he speeding? Was he on his phone? Was he drinking? All these things, right? Once it's an officer, then all the politics come into play, and all the civilians become experts in the situation. And again, I faced it all, put myself in it. Like, I have to read this, I have to watch all this, and I all that did was that put me further and further into a depression. I considered suicide. I considered leaving the country. Like, I considered completely running away from everything, and never talking to anybody, family. Just all this roller coaster of thoughts and emotions and shame and guilt over that year of time frame. But ultimately, I got past, I'd say, I got about 6 months into it before I decided, like, I still have to live my life. Like, these things are out of my control.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have to find something worth pursuing. And I got involved in some other things like network marketing, and I was still an officer at the time. Like, the department did its own investigation administratively and put me back on the road, and kind of put me in a reevaluation period for sure on myself as to what and why. But ultimately, that deep dark place hit a bit of a trampoline back up of, like, I've never allowed myself to really pity the situation or allow myself to feel victimized. Like, I got myself here, I get myself out of it. And ultimately put me in a situation of seeking purpose and seeking, like, what, why, and how I'm here.
Right.
And over that time period, those 6 months or so, for every 100 people bashing my name online or what have you, I'd see one person, whether it was a witness of the accident or somebody that's known me, kind of chime in there and defend my reputation, or say, like, hey, this guy's a good guy. He's helped me anytime I've ever asked him, or hey, he did everything he could to avoid that accident. It was an accident. And those gave me enough to keep searching and looking. And I remember somebody coming up to me one day, seeing me on the news, being and having a mutual friend, and saying, aren't you the guy that was in that accident? I said, yeah. He said, man, God's got plans for you.
Mm.
And a lot of things between, having guardian angels over me at the accident that was sold to me, and things like that were said over time. I was very far from God.
Mm-hmm.
I was mad at God. I was exposed to a lot of different religions and people show me how not to do it. That it really pushed me a direction of finding a relationship with God through different circles and different alignments of people that didn't care who I was, what I'd done, and just cared about who I was in the moment, right? And even when they found out what I had done or found out about the accident, like they didn't care. And there were few and far between people like this that I met, but everyone that I met was like another inch towards light from dark. And I stayed pretty true to seeking that out a bit. Ultimately, the accident investigation concluded, and they found that I hadn't been drinking. I was sober. I had like 6 devices in my vehicle. None of them were on. I was going 10 miles under the speed limit, and the list goes on. But it was an accident. It didn't make it any easier for me to swallow, but it became old news at some point in time.
Right. It allowed people to move on. What, you mentioned that, purpose, right? I'm sure at some point in time during all of this, you questioned like, why were their lives lost and mine was spared?
Yeah.
Why am I still here and they are not? I can just imagine that that's a question that I would be wondering. And so did that come up for you? And as that came up for you, what were the answers you were finding, either on your own or through other people? You talk about, I also found it really incredible that you just said, I don't want to miss the fact that you were known and loved and admired for all these big things that you had achieved that were great and wonderful and positive. And then now you were meeting people who knew about things that weren't great and positive, and they loved you and liked you anyways. So I know there's kind of 2 questions going on there, but I don't want to lose either one of them because I think that they're important. Is there are people listening that are thinking, why was I spared, or why was I given a second chance, or why? And so I wanted you to touch a little bit on that part and what your thoughts were and how you moved through that, and then we can move into the next topic.
Yeah. So as I've gone through life, like I've been very logical. I've been very much like in control of outcomes. And this became that moment that like I couldn't find an answer, right? Like I'd been in search warrants, raids, barricades, all these different things where you could ask that question, like, why did that person pass, or why did this happen, that happen? And I could track it back and connect the dots for people, like, well, this event happened to that event, and this was that person's fault, and these are all the things that happened, right? And in my situation, like, I wrestled with that, and I never was able to answer that for myself, right? Like, why me? Like, I don't understand. Like, I've not lived a good life, in my opinion. Like, I've lived a life of achieving things, and I'm very solution driven. Like, I haven't let things stop me, but like, why me over these 3 people? And I was never able to answer that. And the most peace, oddly enough, that I felt trying to wrestle with that, so many people, obviously, hey, it was an accident. You couldn't control that, right? It's like, that's not good enough for me. It's like, yeah, it was an accident, but it almost feels like a cop out.
Yeah.
Because that accident, like, it just doesn't fit. And there was a mentor that became a mentor over time. His name was Keith Kraft. And the man that connected me to him was Scott Unkelbach. And as I follow these men, they're both very kingdom-driven men. They're both believers. They both do a lot of work in spreading gospel and doing kingdom works out there. And there was this constant woven theme through different books I read, things that I'd heard Keith speak about, things that I'd heard in person through Scott, about how, and this has stuck to me so much. Like there's 3 verses that I carry on a necklace here, and one of those is Romans 8:28, and which condensed version means, God works all things for your good.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time, nothing anybody could say worked, made me feel okay. And the more I dived into this concept of God working people in general, right? Like God working our lives together in this interwoven fabric of story that is His to be told through us. As crazy as it sounded to me at the time, being, all but atheist, uh, made sense.
Yeah.
And it was the only thing that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of all the things people could say, it was the only thing that made sense. Was like, I don't know how, and I don't know what that could be for my good. Like my reputation's shot, and I'm not Google proof anymore for good reasons.
Yeah.
Like I definitely don't know what good can come from this, but for some reason it made sense, and
Yeah.
it felt like, okay, so I've been through a lot in my life. I've been tested a lot. I've gotten through a lot of things. I can get through this. Um, it did all that mental toughness and everything I had done get me to the point to be able to get through something like this so that I can use this for good,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like so many people that I talked to and so many conversations I had about it, like there has been very few, if any, people that when I've had these conversations about the accident and that situation in my life at that time, and we're like, oh, I could have handled that, right? It's
Yeah.
always been like, man, I don't know how you got through that. I don't know how you handled that.
Yeah.
That like, and to go from that to rebuilding and where you are now, like I don't know how you did that, and I feel like God put me through enough so that I could handle that and get through that, and that became a word that I really latched onto, and over time, it's definitely come to fruition, right? It's definitely shown itself to be a testimony and a story that's unlocked a lot of people, that's brought a lot of people to God, and that's allowed me to help create possibility for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
especially in things that are um, self-inflicted. To
Mm-hmm.
have something like that essentially is not, and be able to talk people through how to get through things from walking it out that way.
Yeah.
I've seen it bear fruit now, but at the time, like that was, I don't know how to explain it other than to say like that was the only thing that I heard that made sense, and I continue pursuing. Then what is this that everybody speaks of, right? Like what does it look like to care about whose I am versus who I was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that I became kind of on pursuit to backfill that, like because it made sense, and I felt like I needed to figure out, well, then what and why.
Right. So as you're going through this period of time in your life where you're moving out of I don't know if trauma is the right word, but really the trauma of what happened and moving into healing
Right?
and living life again. Your life is very different today than then. What would you say, or is there a moment in time where you feel like things started to shift and you did start to realize you had a purpose and what it was?
Yeah, I got cleared of everything, right, and ended up still resigning about 6 to 12 months after, and moving to back home to Texas because I just when I started thinking about purpose and reason and wanting to live a legacy or create a legacy, have a family, it just, none of that clicked anymore. And I really pursued my pastor, Keith Craft, that I mentioned. I felt called to Frisco, Texas, which is where he pastors from. And I had already started to really pursue personal development and growth, but I really started to pursue a relationship with God. And over time, I realized that I could hide from that accident and that situation and become this. I mean, I really resonated, or really, what's the word? Debated, changed my name so many times. And to the point that I would just put my first name on so many things. Or, I would put my original last name because it's still on a birth certificate. It's technically an alias. And I would just like, well, I don't want to deal with anybody asking me about the accident.
Right.
At some point in time, there became a shift of, you know what, like, God's got a plan for me. He works all things through my good. I really started getting really deep in my faith. Got saved in 2019. And I realized that running from that would be a waste of life, a waste of
the pain, a waste of what you went through.
And the pain either gets held or put to use, and I could ignore the situation and ignore who I am and hide from it all, or I could really continue down the path that I'd always set, right? Like, whether or not I bring shame or pride to that last name that I had taken on, I realized at some point in time that comes from how I handle this, right? That comes from who I emerge from this situation as a son of God, as a son of Chuck Ayla, and how I honor the lives that passed in that accident, right? Like, to hide from all that would be to hide from God, would be to hide from those that passed, and be to hide from my dad. And I just decided, like, I've hit everything in my life head on, and God put me there for a reason, and I'm going to lean on it, and I'm going to run with it. I mean, I have tattoos in remembrance of that day, and kept the name to a point where I started leaning behind a personal brand on top of the business, and just putting it out there. And it's like, if this is a purpose to honor the situation, honor the accident, and if I'm going to truly believe and have faith in Romans 8:28 and where I'm heading in life, then I need to just wear it on my chest. Like, at the end of the day, what's the worst that can come from it? Right? Like, people are either going to know about it one way or another. They're going to know about it because I hide it, or because I put it out there.
Yeah.
So I get to determine the way it's used and the way the story is told. If I put it out there, right? If I wear it on my chest, I get to point that to a glory, from Glory's story, right? I get to give it meaning and tell the purpose behind it all, and where that's gone in my life. If I hide from it, then I leave it to everybody's interpretation.
Yes. This is a really, really, really important point to make, because we all experience pain and suffering in our life. And I think many people, we have a choice of how to respond to it. Some people will hide from it, like you said, and we like to push it down and shove it down and pretend it doesn't exist, and, live our life around it, and trying to avoid it. And it's so hard when you're in the middle of something incredibly painful to see how anything good could have come from it. How, like, God, how could something so tragic ever turn into something beautiful and positive and purposeful? And I think that a lot of people will choose to run from it and hide from it and push it down. And it's harder to face it. But like you said, there's purpose in our pain if we allow it. But you can't heal if you don't feel. Right? I had a counselor say that to me one time, like, there's healing in the feeling, and when we shove it down and we ignore it and we pretend it didn't happen, there's no healing. And if you don't heal, then nothing positive can come from it. And so I think it's, incredible that you were able to go through something so hard that many people listening to it, and even when I heard your story, I was just like, I can't even imagine going through that and what it must have felt like, and how you get to the other side of it. But you did, and you turned all of the pain and suffering, both in your life and in the lives of the family members who were lost that day in the accident, into something positive. And so I want you to share that, of what your life looks like today. What are you doing today? What is the impact you're making today that came from that?
I got into sales, which ultimately led to business, and the purpose behind what I'm doing in business right now. I have a portfolio of a couple different things, some franchises here and there, but the purpose I really feel is the key. Is the more I followed my mentors, and I followed the Bible, and I followed the transformation I had made, the more discipleship and impacting people's lives in a positive nature became the purpose. Like, even in business, I have a management company, and we go around and we help different businesses kind of turn things around from poor cultures and low revenue and things of that nature. But we do it by impacting people and just servant leadership and growth within the individuals, and that it grows revenue and what have you, but it ultimately grows people. It grows the experience within the business. All these things impacts the community, and has ultimately been the way that I have found to take what I learned and the transformation I had at the church I met and the mentors I've had, and to take it out, instead of just coming to a place where I felt like I got saved for sure, and I feel like I was able to find purpose in God's story for my life to be told. And now how do I get this out here? Because this stuff, like this feeling of knowing whose I am versus who I am, is better than any accolade I've ever gotten. It's better than any reward I could ever have. Like, to see God work, especially through me. I mean, obviously the Bible. If you read the Bible, I mean, God, he rolled with notorious sinners in a lot of ways, and to see that you're not disqualified, and if anything, you're qualified because of things that have happened and things you have done, and the choices you've decided to walk out from that. It's put me in a place that the business is great, but that's led to coaching, consulting, and all the success in business. To be honest, glory to God, of course, but it really comes from structure, making things simple, duplication that the military and law enforcement taught me, and that's been easy to translate to business to make money. But what's the most amazing thing right now is whether it's in the podcasts I do, the speaking engagements that I travel to and do, or even the one-on-one growth, self-development that happens within my own company or the companies we touch and we get involved with, is the shift that you see in people when you're able to wear a tragedy and wear trauma as a badge because you worked through it and
Mhm.
because it doesn't make you who you are. It shows what you're capable of, and it shows the things you've been through and the possibility that creates for people.
Yeah.
I've been able to step on stages, walk in rooms, and share a story like this that's like completely disarming to people. So it's like, well, okay, if that happened to you, then I'm gonna go ahead and share this because
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
not feeling that big right now. And not to say that nobody's been through anything as big as me or bigger or anything like that. It's just when you have been equipped with all the tactical steps on how to be resilient and how to push forward and accomplish things no matter the room you step in, and to do all that stuff because you want to be the best and you want to be the 1% and you want to, push through and make the accomplishment, and then shift that to having purpose behind it after being torn down from the top,
Yeah.
to having to live at the bottom and climb your way back up, but to do it in the right way and to do it with purpose. It creates such a disarming ability for people to open up to the possibility of what's the purpose and reason behind it, and why are they holding themselves back
Yep.
over small things.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes them realize, like you said, that there's probably many of their own life circumstances that caused them to hold back in life, to make them afraid to take a chance or do something, whether it's in business or in life, in the relationship. We all kind of have these experiences and we attach a story to it. And we let that story drive the choices that we make, right? And so it's like, what story do you want to attach to it? And so people hearing your story and what you've been through and being through something so hard helps to illuminate, shine a light for them on their own stories, their own pain their own fear that might be holding them back from fulfilling their own purpose in
Yeah.
this world. And so you being open and willing and not hiding from what happened is giving freedom to so many people who are being held back by their own pain and their own suffering and their own story. So I think it's remarkable, the transformation that you've had over that time. Go ahead.
I would say, and it really magnifies their testimonies, right? Like to have gone through a situation like that, whether if I'm talking about somebody about sobriety or adultery or all the things that you can find in conversation that is holding people back or that they have guilt and shame from.
Yeah.
It's like when you can put something like this out there and be like, look, if God can save me, then that situation is probably savable as well, right? Like it becomes this such stark contrast that what seemed like a mountain to them at the time becomes like a molehill, right?
Yeah.
And then to see how I could carry that and use that as an opportunity to disarm the situation, have them rethink about how what they're tackling is really not that big at the end of the day, and they're causing it and they can fix it. Once they make that shift, then they see it a whole nother way, just like I have, right? They're able to see it of, well, heck, now who can I go help with this?
Yeah.
Like what I have in my hand here, what I was able to come through that I thought was completely insurmountable and I was going to carry with me to the grave.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I find that people are so afraid to talk about their struggles, their problems, all the things out loud. But as soon as you say them out loud, I find that it just sucks all the power out of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like it takes away the power that it was holding over you and this, binding it had on you. And that once you share it openly and speak it openly, it's just like takes away the power that it had over you. And so sharing feels scary, but it actually is a huge part of the healing and the moving on.
Absolutely.
So So I have two final questions for you as we wrap up. One is, what is the most important message or lesson that you hope our listeners take away? You shared so many things that I just feel like even one of the things that you said is going to have a big impact on people. But if there's just one main important message that you want people to walk away from, what would that be?
Well, obviously, I'm unapologetic with faith, right? I would say never limit yourself from what you think is possible, because the biggest challenge that you could think of, the hardest journey you could imagine to walk, if you believe for it, if it's in your heart to do, if it aligns with your purpose, like it's it, it's extremely easy to walk out with God by your side. If you seek it anywhere else other than your purpose, and whether or not it's giving glory to something bigger than you, and for some people that may not be God, but at the end of the day, if you can find a way to serve something other than yourself, you'd be surprised at what you're ultimately capable of. Because most of the time when people are limiting themselves, it is because it's just that it's about themselves. They're limiting themselves. They don't know if it's worth it, what they're going to get from it. Is it going to be worth the squeeze, right? All these things. The moment you don't make it about yourself, like you free the limitations off. So
Yeah. So this is a question that may or may be easy to answer or hard to answer. And it's just, I didn't warn you ahead of time. But if you had to give a definition to the word resilience, what does resilience mean to you?
what does resilience mean to me? I feel like it's the meaning of resilience, because that's a loaded question right there. Resilience really is life. It's about who you want to be, what you want to accomplish, what you want to leave behind. Like that dash between your beginning and end on your tombstone, like that's going to be determined. What that dash means for your life is going to be determined about how resilient you are.
Yeah.
Right. And because life's not fair, we know that, and you're going to be hit with a lot. And the willingness to be resilient in those moments are going to determine how far down the path you go, and really the difference between living your life or just existing through it.
Yeah, that's good. So if people want to know more about you, if they want to learn about your coaching or some of the other businesses that you have, where can people connect with you and learn more?
Sure. Just travisala.com. So TravisALA.com. From there, all my contact information, there's a tab for coaching. You name it, it's all through there.
Awesome. Travis, I am honored to have you as our first guest on the Resilience Factor. And I just want to thank you for being very open and honest about life and what you've been through and the transformation that you've had. And it's been an honor to have you here.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Adrian.
Thanks, Travis.
Thanks for having me.
Today's story was a remarkable testament to human resilience, courage, and perseverance. I encourage you to carry their lessons with you to use as an opportunity to grow, evolve, and strengthen your resolve. As a special gift for my listeners, I've put together a free guide called the Resilience Playbook. If you've ever felt stuck or powerless, I'm sharing 10 resilience factors to give you hope, inspiration, and empowerment. Get yours free today and start turning your setbacks into comebacks. Go to theresiliencefactorpodcast.com/playbook to get your copy today, or click the link in the show notes. You can do hard things, my friend. Strength lies within you, just waiting to be unveiled. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and most importantly, stay resilient.